Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi.
Over the last few months, the Rhode Island Foundation has gathered dozens of local movers and shakers to dream up ways of rebooting Rhode Island's beleaguered economy. This week, the foundation is rolling out what it calls an economic action agenda, full of ideas for creating jobs and boosting industries where the state has a competitive advantage. This week, on the first half of Executive Suite, a first look at the Rhode Island Foundation's new economic action agenda with President and CEO Neil Steinberg. Plus, in his State of the State address, Governor Chafee hailed signs that Rhode Island's job market is improving.
By nearly every measure, Rhode Island is on the upswing.
But with unemployment still above 9% and more than 20,000 jobs still MIA, what's the real story on unemployment? On the second half of Executive Suite, we dive deep on Rhode Island's jobs crisis and the 5 charts you need to see to understand it. Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. Neil, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
And I have to disclose, of course, the Rhode Island Foundation, where Neil is president and CEO, sponsors this program, but this is a newsy event they're having, and that's why I wanted to have him on. And let's dive right into it, Neil. What's the genesis of this economic action agenda you've rolled out this week with the Commerce Corp? Where did it come from? How'd you come up with these ideas?
Sure. If you go back a little last fall, we had several conversations. So there were things going on at the same time. The Office of Statewide Planning is doing a sustainable communities program called the Roadmap, where they put together a plan for the state of Rhode Island. It includes economic development and housing, environment, et cetera. When they're putting together that plan, they wanted private sector input. They wanted help getting private sector input. At the same time, we had discussions with Marcel Valois at the then EDC, now Commerce Corp Rhode Island, about what we can do to get people together to come up with more action items. We had some success with our Make It Happen Rhode Island initiative a little over a year ago that basically was to prompt new thinking and new initiatives, and we've seen successful endeavors come out of that. So we talked with Marcel, and he had the idea to look at sectors that are important to the state, both strengths that we have now, ones that were emerging, and how they intersect. So how do we get people together? What was different was when we did this the first time around, we did it just purely private sector, didn't involve the public sector at all. This now was getting into the public-private partnership. So Marcel is also charged legislatively with putting together, with statewide planning, an economic development plan to present to the legislature in October. So again, the opportunity to inform that real-world opinions from people across many different sectors. So we decided to get people together. We had 200 people plus over 3 months in the fall, 20 different sessions. They met at focus groups. There were focus groups, think groups, not round up the usual suspects, and they were all around these intersections. So agriculture and aquaculture, and design and manufacturing, and interconnectivity, and tourism and the arts, to see how they work together. And then the other important part of this was what ideas could come out of this that could start now. That we don't have to wait for a plan, although it'll be part of a plan, that we can help. And the we is a global we. It's the Rhode Island Foundation, it's the business community, it's the public sector, that we can get going and jumpstart and enable and inspire and push people to do.
So I'm curious, just, those focus groups, that's quite a window into what's being thought about in different industries and among different people. What stood out to you as the insights? What did you take away from, maybe if you were talking to a policymaker, what would you want to tell them about? I know you've met with the governor to talk about these ideas with him. What sort of things are you bringing up and highlighting?
First of all, it was more positive than some people would think. So, people talk about all the times the barrier to this, all the different things that we hear about that we don't have to rehash. But we got together groups, again, across industries, people who have been around for a long time, people who are new to the state, the academic community, the nonprofit community, all together, very positive. How can we do more? How can we get people back to work? How can we grow our businesses? One of the surprises, and it's not necessarily a grand conclusion, very little discussion about taxes. So in all these meetings, we need more people that we can employ and that have the skills. We need to break down some regulatory barriers. We need to work together. We need to grow this, but not a lot on taxes. And it doesn't mean that taxes aren't important. I don't want to be the one to say that, because they are to a lot of people, but it was not the driving force behind moving the economy forward.
How these businesses are making decisions about growing, where to grow, what they can do and everything. And it sounds like if you're thinking about something with government, it was more about regulatory matters than taxes.
And people, and finding people.
And finding the right people.
And we heard a lot of exciting growth stories, some of whom you featured, I think. Danielle Foods, building a huge addition on their facility out in Pasco. They pay the same taxes.
Best Italian cured meat in Barrowville.
It is, and in the country. But they're paying the same tax rates. Yeah. They have the same energy costs. They figured out a way to be successful and grow. So it was very heartening. And then the other thing, and I know we'll talk about a little, there was focus on what our strengths are and where are the emerging strengths in the state.
And that's actually, that goes right into the next question I had for you, which was, you talked about Danielle Foods, the food industry. You don't hear as much, maybe you're hearing more now, but then say about biotech or something a little more sexy, and that's at the top of the headlines. What sectors and industries that you heard some dynamism out that got you excited, that you thought was interesting?
So let's stick with food for a minute. So, a lot of times when we think of food, we think of the great restaurants, and that's a given to the point where we probably take it for granted, but they're great restaurants. But what we heard were the great restaurants growing the food in Rhode Island, growing it in the land in Rhode Island, growing it in the sea in Rhode Island, producing food, whether it's UNFI or Granny Squibb or Danielle, actually making it here. And then got into where the emerging part is food and health. The Food Innovation Nexus, that's something brand new, seeded by Johnson & Wales, that brings together food, nutrition, and the delivery of health. Not just healthy foods so you don't get fat, but actually delivering medicine through food. So it's a spectrum that surprised me how broad that category was. Another one was water. So water. When we think of water, again, we think of tourism and we think of the shore. There are 11 states in the country in a drought that don't have water. If you go to Arizona, you go to California, it is not a given that your business will have plenty of water. Amgen came here at one point because we had water. So using the water as a strength there, using the ocean, our shoreline for boat building. Electric boat is here because we have a shoreline, we have a port. Boat building in different areas, as well as fishing and seafood and tourism. So these topics that we kind of know that we have broadened significantly to me when I heard about them.
Reminds me too of Far Sounder we just had on a few weeks ago, doing the sonar underwater. Another thing that's in your report that's a word that you don't hear quite as much, and I'd like to hear you expound on, is the importance of resiliency. Where did that word come from? What do you mean by it in a report like this? Why did it stick out to you from these conversations?
Yeah, so first caveat, I'm not the expert on resiliency. It grows out of the different areas of when you look at the disasters that we've had a lot of times and how communities can bounce back. We have folks down in Newport, we have folks who have worked on rainwater and wastewater recovery, a lot of things that trip over into the environment, but that all resiliency is the bouncing back. So how do we preserve our shoreline? And the thought is, as well as other parts of the environment, that we can be a beta site, that this is one of the areas that not only do we have to look at it, the joke about where the shoreline's going to be in Warwick at some point or in the middle of the state at the rate we're going, but also the fact that we have technology, we have research at our different higher ed institutions, and that we could be a beta site and a national center for resiliency, for figuring out the environment and its impact in the states.
All right, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk more with Neil about what ideas are in this economic action agenda that the Rhode Island Foundation is rolling out with the Commerce Corp, which is the former EDC, and we're going to talk about some of the specific ideas that are in there, as well as some other initiatives going on around the workforce. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. Later on in the show, we're going to do something new for Executive Suite. We're going to look at some charts together, and I'm going to walk you through some of the important stats on unemployment and the employment situation in Rhode Island, which actually dovetails with some of what we're talking about here. But Neil, first I'm pleased to be joined by Neil Steinberg, President and CEO of the Rhode Island Foundation. We're talking about the new economic action agenda he's rolling out today. You can see my snow-faded brain skills here today as I struggle. But let's talk about these 5 overarching categories you have in the report. We'll just take them one by one, and you give us the short version of why it matters and how it got in there. Number 1, increasing the impact of competitive advantages.
Sure, and again, I just want to emphasize again, these were the themes that came from the private sector input. We didn't sit there, Commerce Corp didn't sit there and make these up. So competitive advantages, play to our strengths. You know, just like you do in sports, you play to your strengths. And so we talked about some of them, like food and like water. Some of the other ones that are very exciting, brain science. So you have an institute at URI, you have an institute at Lifespan, and you have the Brown Brain Sciences program. We need to see those work together, but we've developed a core competency there. So it's taking strengths that already exist and leveraging them and bringing them to scale. I think we've had a challenge in the past of many initiatives have started small, they've gotten going, they've been successful, we haven't gotten them to scale. We've got to bring some of these to scale.
Scale, that's something that came up when I was talking to some of your staff about what was important here, the need to not just let it grow a little and be nice, to get something hefty.
Right.
Number 2, promoting emerging opportunities. Promoting emerging opportunities. You kind of touched on that too, I guess.
We did a little. You know, there are others. Cybersecurity, which is one that's been identified where there's a core competency in the state and is emerging. And to see where we can leverage these things that are just starting to come out now and we can grow them. And so it's not picking 1 or 2 winners, it's seeding a whole lot of these different areas that we have competency and we have people and we have research going on. And again, then finding the ones that have momentum and taking them to scale.
And letting them take off, yeah. Number 3, supporting intersections and connectivity.
Yeah, so that's a fancy way of saying despite our wonderfully small state, we have too many people who don't work together.
Which is interesting, because how many people come on here and say, it's small, we all work together, so it's great.
I know. And then you say, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
I never heard about that. 10 miles away, I didn't know it was going on. So when we had these groups together, there was a lot of, gee, we need to get together more. What we saw to make it happen the first time around was groups, the design community came together and formed a group. Digital technology, medical technology came together. And so there's a need and a desire more for getting together with a specific purpose to grow, to exchange information, and then data. One of the other factors that came out was everybody wants to have data, everybody wants to have their own database. How can we create, and it's not that hard in a state like this, kind of master databases where you can access a company that does this, a professor that does that, a resource for something else, and put it all together. But use our strength of size as a strength, not as a weakness.
So get people to pass out of the Warwick border into Cranston once in a while,
correct,
if it's necessary.
That's right.
Number 4, building capacity and the business ecosystem. That one might be vague to people. What's that mean?
It means, you know, what's going on, it makes it easier or tough to do business.
Okay.
And so you look at access to capital. We really have to figure that out, whether it's innovative capital for young entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs, they don't have to be young, whether it's for small businesses that have been around a long time that need capital to grow.
And some viewers might say, well, what exactly capital? We're just talking basic financing.
Money.
To working capital, to get your company going, to pay the bills, to get started.
Right. If I could buy a piece of equipment for $250,000, can I grow my business? To some of the affinity groups, to the growing Latino population. I think one of the other things that we emphasize in this report are the demographic changes, the growing Latino population that's going to be the workforce of tomorrow. How do we make sure that they're supported and they're ready? So it's business regulation. How do we make it easy for people to do business and still balance that you don't want polluted waters, you don't want unsafe factories, but you don't want obstacles to people growing. That's what the ecosystem is, how we do business and what we do for and with people.
Number 5, final one, and this is something already in the discussion this week in the state, supporting the talent pipeline. Talent, that means the workforce. Tell me about why that came in.
A perfect example, in one of the sessions, I was actually sitting at a table, there were 4 manufacturers, different types of industries, who said they had 38 job openings between them, okay, so that they couldn't fill. Now, yes, some of them may be experienced, some that could be trained. We have still almost 50,000 people unemployed, 9%, highest in the country unemployment rate. There are people there that want to go back to work. You can debate how many, but there are people there who want to go back to work. There are people there that need skills training. We need to prepare today. How do we get those people back to work? How do we get people to the businesses that need people? And then how do we make plans? We knew this talent gap was coming. You can read the reports over decades. How do we make sure that those third graders, those fifth graders, those eighth graders are prepared for the jobs? Electric boat, well documented how much they're growing. They need workers. We know it. It's documented, it's there. We need to get to people now. We need to have better, and I know the word pathways is overused, but we need to have a better vehicle so that whether you want to go high school and then into to work, if you want to go to a 4-year college and get a degree, if you want to get a master's or PhD, or if you want a certificate, or if you want 2-year training, if you want an internship and apprenticeship. We're behind the world in apprenticeships. You go to Germany, you go to Switzerland, 60–70% of the students in high school there get an apprenticeship. There was just an article in the Wall Street Journal about it. So that's all aimed at what do we need today, how do we close the gap. I know that there's sometimes skepticism. If we build it, are there enough jobs? I have yet to hear a state complain we have too many trained workers. We have too many skilled workers. Yep. We have too many educated workers. This is a national gap. It's not just here in Rhode Island, and I think we have to realize that too. And
you were actually there, we're taping this on Wednesday, Tuesday of this week, just before the snowstorm. The Rhode Island Senate released a report with some ideas on how to fix Rhode Island's unemployment problem. A lot in there about job training and workforce development. It sounds like it dovetails with what you're talking about. What do you think of that? You were there.
Yeah, no, I'm very supportive of that and very impressed with what they did. We validated it independently by the groups that we have that raise these topics. We've talked with the Senate. They're addressing exactly what I just said. What do we need today to close the skills gap, get people back to work, get companies that need workers, the workers so they can grow, and then how do we prepare for the future? Part of it is legislative policy, part of it's dollars, but it doesn't appear to be tens and twenties and hundreds of millions of dollars.
You had a specific ask at that event that I read in the paper. What did you tell them?
Well, you know, I thought it was a great idea. I think a lot of people think it's a great idea. Labor, business, everybody seems to support it, to get it done now. To get it done early in the legislative session, that this is not something Senate generated, but the governor is very supportive of closing the skills gap in workforce education. The speaker's very supportive. We'd love to see it get done early to demonstrate to everybody in the state, whether it's the kids who are in school that need to look at a prosperous Rhode Island where they can work, whether it's employers that are looking at growing their business, or people who are collecting unemployment checks. Let's give them something positive and proactive and pass it now.
And we'll see whether I'm writing the story July 2nd at midnight.
Right.
Did it pass the night before?
I'll be disappointed.
Finally, I want to ask you, you have the economic action agenda coming out this week. What's the next step with it? Where does it go from here?
Sure, and it goes back some to the beginning. So this will be incorporated into the state plan for economic development.
Only about 30 seconds.
That Marcel and statewide planning are doing. And the other is the call to action, as we did in the first Make It Happen. Let's get the private sector to step up and do these things.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, Neil, where am I here? Here we go. We're going to take another break, but I thank you for joining me. And you can learn more about the foundation's plan, I think, on your website,
Correct.
right? What's the URL there?
It's rifoundation.org.
rifoundation.org. Great. And we'll check in to see how things go. When we come back, I'll walk you through Rhode Island's jobs crisis. Some of the key charts you need to know, fits right in with what we're talking about here and the problems they're trying to solve. And stick with us on Executive Suite for the third half there. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. Earlier this month, Governor Chafee gave his annual State of the State address, and he used the opportunity to share his thoughts on Rhode Island's job market. Here's some of what he had to say.
By nearly every measure, Rhode Island is on the upswing. The last employment report showed all of the factors examined: unemployment rate, unemployed residences, employed residences, labor force, and Rhode Island-based jobs moving in the right direction. Since I took office in January of 2011, we have created 11,100 Rhode Island-based jobs.
So, 7 years after the economic downturn started, how is Rhode Island's job market doing? We decided to take a closer look, and we're going to show you the 5 charts you need to see to understand Rhode Island's job crisis. Let's start with the statistic Governor Chafee highlighted there, the number of jobs based in Rhode Island. 11,000 new jobs sounds impressive until you put it in context. Take a look at this. Back in December 2006, we reached a record high in Rhode Island with just shy of 500,000 jobs in the state. Then came the Great Recession. By the time local payrolls bottomed out in August 2009, almost 40,000 jobs were gone. And even though more than 4 years have passed since then, as of now, the number of jobs in Rhode Island is still down by almost 26,000 compared with before the recession. Experts now say the number of jobs in Rhode Island may not get back to where they were before the recession until the year 2018, which would be more than a decade after the job losses started. It's a very different picture across the border in Massachusetts. On this chart, Massachusetts is in red and Rhode Island is in blue. As you can see here, while Rhode Island jobs are still nowhere near their 2006 level, in Massachusetts they already have more jobs today than they had before the recession. So those are the numbers on jobs, but what about Rhode Island workers? There's a difference. After all, Rhode Island residents could be going across the border and working at jobs in Massachusetts, even if job growth is weak back home. Let's start with the most familiar statistic on this, the official unemployment rate. If you're a glass half full type of person, you can see some room for optimism here. Rhode Island's unemployment rate is down from nearly 12% back in early 2010 to just over 9% now. So far, so good. But now look at this. This is a less familiar statistic, but it's an important one. Economists call it the employment to population ratio. Basically, it just tells you how many of the state's adults have a job. And as you can see, it doesn't show much sign of improvement for Rhode Island. Back in January 2007, just before the economy started to slide, more than 65% of Rhode Islanders were working. Now, 7 years later, it's down to less than 60%. That's the lowest level since 1983 when Joe Garrahy was still governor. In fact, one of the key reasons Rhode Island's unemployment rate is down today is because so many people have stopped looking for work. In other words, if the share of adults seeking a job hadn't dropped over the past 7 years, Rhode Island's unemployment rate would be 14% today. Now, in fairness, there's some debate nationally about why that employment to population number is down. It's possible some of it is because the population is aging. If more of the population is over 65, you'd expect fewer people to be holding down a job. Which brings us to our last chart. No disrespect to our 55-year-old viewers, but economists call workers between the ages of 25 and 54 prime age. These are the people you expect to have a job, and Rhode Island is losing them. The bar on the left shows the number of prime-age residents in Rhode Island in 2006. The bar on the right shows how many were left in 2012. Rhode Island lost 1 in 10 of its prime-age residents, 46,000 people, during those 6 years. So while Governor Chafee is selling an improved unemployment rate, Rhode Island still has a long way to go to get back to full employment. And that's all for this week on Executive Suite. Be sure to tune in next week when my guests will be the chairman and CEO of Twin River Casino to talk about how their new table games are doing and why they just bought a casino in Mississippi. If you missed any of this episode or any other episode, you can catch them all on our website, WPRI.com. I'll see you back here next week on Executive Suite.